Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I am your host, Preet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week we're talking about UFC Perth, which is headlined by a light heavyweight clash between rising contender Carlos Ulberg and former title challenger Dominic Reyes, who's having a complete career resurgence after going on I believe it was a 4-fight losing streak or 3-fight losing streak. He has bounced back with 3 straight victories and has now positioned himself once again in line for fighting for a title if he can rack up another win or two. In the co-main event, light heavyweights also get the honors there as Aussie's own Jimmy Crute goes up against Ivan Erslan. And that kind of just goes to show the depth or lack of depth that this card has. As you would expect, there are a plethora of Aussies and New Zealand representatives on this card to obviously, get the crowd behind them down there in Perth. But also, the big knock on these Australian cards in the past have often been that these fighters get taxed at a very high rate, which is why not a lot of fighters, or at least big name fighters, don't want to compete in the region. Hence why we often have very weak cards whenever they fight down there in Australia. So even though we got 14 fights on the card, there are some bangers in terms of, if you really know what's up. But in terms of name value, outside of the main event, there is not much to really look at. Now, let's quickly go over the, before we get into the recap, I just want to quickly say we have a very busy week ahead of us in terms of events. Tuesday, we obviously have the Contender Series, but on Friday, we have PFL Europe 3. And then on Saturday, we have PFL MENA 3, Cage Warriors 194, LFA 218, and then it culminates with UFC Perth. I'll have breakdowns for all of those cards on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. But I'll also have video breakdowns for PFL Europe, Cage Warriors, and LFA probably the day before all of those events. So stay tuned to the YouTube channel, not just for all the other great segments that I have for the UFC card, but also for those full card breakdowns. All right. Let's quickly go over the Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night play for the last UFC card. We're coming off of an off week, so we're going to be talking about the event prior to that, which was the Noche UFC card, and we managed to hit on our Lock of the Night play with Kelvin Gastelum. It was a little bit chalky around that minus 240 range, but that was a fight that he wins, 9 out of 10 times, 10 out of 10 times. Hence why I was happy to take the chalk on him that night. He nearly finished Old Swoos a few times there, but very good work from him to continuously put that power on him, drop him a few times, and clearly win that fight once it hit the scorecards. But very bad that he missed weight once again, especially up at 185 pounds. That now brings our Lock of the Night record to 46-30 for a 60% hit rate. Again, not the number that I'd like to be at. We had a miss or two, I believe, over the past 2 weeks as well that has kind of brought that hit rate down, but we're going to trudge on here. For Dog of the Night plays, we actually hit on Joaquim Silva as he pulls out that split decision victory. I believe it was a split decision over Claudio Poyes. I thought Silva would be a little bit more dominant with his approach, but he still seemed to struggle with some of the takedowns from Poyes. Luckily, 2 of the judges saw that fight in our favor and were able to cash him as our Dog of the Night play. We did cash a few other Dog of the Nights. That now brings our Dog of the Night record for 2025 to 45-50 for a 47% hit rate. Again, we're firmly in the profit, very happy with the performance that we've had there, and we're going to get pretty damn close to our goal, if not surpass our goal, by the ending of the year with about 2.5/3 months left of events. All right, let's shift our attention now over to this UFC Perth card. 14 fights in total to talk about. Decent betting card depending on the spots that you're really feeling here. Before putting out this breakdown for you guys, I've already fired off on 7 spots. Again, you can find those on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, including my Lock of the Night play, which I've already locked in. Just a note before I get into these breakdowns here, quite stuffy throughout this podcast. I'm battling some sort of nose congestion, nasal congestion. I'm trying to work through it here. So if you hear it in my voice, I apologize. There are plenty of cuts that you'll notice throughout this podcast where I have to take a break to just blow my nose and just get rid of all this shit. I apologize. I'm just giving you guys a fair warning now. This was a tough one to record, trying to battle through this thing. So Just giving you the note right off the bat here. All right, let's get right into it. First matchup up takes place in the women's strawweight division as we have Loma Lookboonmee coming in at plus 200 going up against Alexia Thainara, who comes in at minus 235. Now, starting off on the Thai side here with Lookboonmee, she's coming off of a decision victory from Estela Nunes back in February in a fight where she got off on her volume in the first round. In the second round, she struggled to get off the cage as Nunes was pushing her up there. She did manage to break free with about a minute left and get some decent damage off, but only one judge scored that fight or that round in her favor. And then in the third round, she got to her wrestling, showcasing that she is now a complete mixed martial artist and can go out there and out-grapple some of these opponents. But she's even shown it as early as her fight against Denise Gomez. She ended up submitting Elise Reed, and then, like I said, really grinding out that third round against Estela Nunes with her wrestling and that top control. But this is a fighter that has been training Muay Thai since she was a child. She grew up pretty much in the Muay Thai world, but turned her attention to mixed martial arts when she was 22 years old, I believe it is, or 23. And since then has put together a 10-3 mixed martial arts record. Now, standing at 5'1" with a 61-inch reach, it's safe to say that she would benefit highly from an atomweight division, but that is a division that the UFC refuses to bring into the fold. They brought in 145, but obviously that's gone to the wayside now with the lack of competition there. There are plenty more fighters in the world that would fill out the atomweight division, and I think Lookboonmee would be one of the better fighters to drop down to that weight class if it ends up opening up. She came up in the Tiger Muay Thai system mainly under the Hickman brothers, and then once the Hickman brothers opened up Bang Tao Muay Thai over there in Thailand, she shifted on over with those guys as well, and she's often split her camp between Syndicate MMA and Bang Tao. Now, she's going up against one of the better prospects on the rise here in Alexia Thainara, who brings in a 12-1 record and pulled off a solid win in her short notice UFC debut against Molly McCann back in March. That night, she went strike for strike with McCann and then eventually opened up a takedown opportunity. And from there, she smashed Molly McCann from that top position. And I think she ended up getting a submission that night. She is very good. 8 of her 12 wins coming by submission. It's clear what she wants to do when she gets her opponents on the mat. She is looking for finishes more often than not. Her contract-winning performance against then LFA champion Rose Conceição was very impressive as she was leading the dance from minute 1 to minute 15 and really putting the pressure on Conceição repeatedly through that fight. She has some technical issues in her striking game, but she makes up for it with the aggressiveness and forward pressure that she continues to put on her opponents. She is a close training partner of Amanda Ribas, and you often see her in her corner as well. Very big on Thainara, and the fact that she's only 27 years old and has shown very good things throughout her run leads me to believe that this is a fighter that could potentially challenge for the strawweight title one day. And in this matchup specifically, I believe Thainara opened up as a slight underdog, but the public knows that she has a massive advantage and strength advantage here over Lookboonmee, which is why she's driving all the way up to that minus 250 range at this point. I agree with it. I think Thainara takes this fight to the ground with relative ease. I think she smashes Lookboonmee from that top position, and I think it's just a matter of time before she wraps up another submission for herself here, and I think she does it quite dominantly. So I'm going to go with Thainara and Thainara by submission. She just has to find her way into the takedowns from a disciplined approach early on, as Lookboonmee is obviously dangerous with her striking, although at the strawweight division, not a lot of knockout power that Thainara has to worry about. So I think it's just a matter of time before she ends up getting the fight to the ground, utilizing her size, strength, and just grappling advantage. And that should lead to Thainara sinking in a submission early on in this fight. All right, next up in the heavyweight division, we have the debuts of Brando Pericic, who comes in at minus 220, taking on Alicia Ellison, who comes in at plus 185. Now, starting off on the Pericic side of things, he is a city kickboxing product, which is probably why he's getting the call up on this fight. Although he was scheduled to fight Ellison on the Contender Series a month ago, it seems like the UFC scrapped those plans and brought these guys right into the fold. And it seems as though they've done that with a few heavyweights, guys that may not even deserve to be on the UFC level, but they are aware of how shallow the heavyweight division is, hence why they're bringing in all these guys to start filling out that roster. which kind of even further drives home the point as they should have re-signed Martin Budai, who I believe was 6-1 and 7-1 in the promotion, but for some reason did not bring him back. Anyway, getting back to Pericic now, who is 31 years old, has won or finished all 4 of his pro fights. His lone defeat came in a fight where his opponent dragged him into the grappling realm in many scenarios, and it was clear by the 3rd or 4th minute that Pericic was starting to slow down and making many mistakes, which led to his opponent eventually getting that submission in the 2nd round. On the feet, obviously, he's a great striker, good power, but he's faced very low level of competition. We know that his cardio is a big question mark, but obviously at heavyweight, one punch can change the tide in anything. But if opponents can really put it on him in the clinch or drag him to the ground and force him to use some energy, that's where we can see opponents start to take advantage of him. The same can kind of be said about Ellison, who has finished all 5 of his pro fights, but has also had his lone defeat come by 2nd round submission in a fight where it looked like he was out of gas about 3 or 4 minutes into that 1st round. It only took about 45 seconds in the 2nd round for his opponent to find that submission, and it really seemed like Ellison was huffing and puffing by that point in time. But he is an athletic, fast, explosive fighter with big knockout power. His grappling is not all that bad. He actually trains under Jeff Hoagland, who is the head coach of Chase Hooper as well. So you can kind of understand where he's getting some of those grappling chops from. He has some decent takedowns. He's reversed out of a couple positions as well. But it's really that gas tank management, similar to his opponent this weekend, which he needs to master a little bit more before he hopes to get deeper and deeper into the heavyweight division. Again, both these guys can use a lot more grooming on the regional scene before facing the ranked heavyweights that the UFC has to offer. But luckily they're putting them up against each other here and only one of them can move forward. I'm going to lean ever so slightly to the Ellison side of things. Now, studying this fight, I really expected it to be a toss-up, a pick-em fight. But when I saw that Pericic was at minus 220, I don't know if that had to do with his city kickboxing affiliation, the fact that he's fighting close to home. Maybe he has a little bit better technical striking. But, both these guys are very sus, especially after that 1st round. And both guys are very hittable. So I'm going to lean with the guy that is more athletic, is faster, has a little bit more knockout power, and probably has the ability to take this fight to the ground and make it a little bit grimier. So again, both low-level guys at this stages of their career. I'm going to go with the big underdog here in Ellison. I think he ends up getting the knockout, but you got to be very wary planting your flag confidently on either side. No way would I want any part of minus 220 in this type of fight. I'd rather take the plus 185, but luckily I still like it enough that I'd be willing to wager a little bit on it to prove my point. So give me Ellison and Ellison by knockout in the 2nd fight of the night. All right, next up, another debutante here in the women's bantamweight division, as we have Michelle Montague coming in at minus 210, going up against Luana Carolina, who comes in at plus 180. Now, starting off on the Montague side of things, she is 6-0 with all 6 of her wins coming by rear naked choke. She is a close training partner of Kayla Harrison and is a Kiwi, so I'm sure she's happy to be fighting close to home here. But she has mainly set up shop in Florida at American Top Team, and as I said, is one of the closer training partners of Kayla Harrison, who, strength for strength, she could probably hold her own with. Well, maybe not in the judo realm, but Montague is very strong, very physical. Her striking is still very robotic, which is where a lot of the question remains in her fights. But luckily for her, she's been able to get opponents to the ground more often than not and sink in that submission and force that choke. Now, it's not like she mainly goes out there and just looks to choke her opponents out. For example, in her last fight for the PFL, she had a very good position where she could torque a Kimura on her opponent, and she got it in pretty deep, but her opponent gutted it out and managed to survive. But from there, Montague saw the opportunity to transition to the back of her opponent, and she was quickly able to sink in that rear naked choke and force the tap. She's very strong, and a fighter that had earlier on in her career competed at lightweight in the amateur ranks. She slowly started moving down to 145 pounds, and I believe all but one of her pro fights have taken place at 145 pounds. Now with her coming into the UFC, she's going to be forced to cut down to 135 pounds, which might be difficult for her to do given the size that she brings to the table. So on weigh-in day, that is something definitely to keep an eye on, and something that could impact her performance, especially with how often she utilizes her physicality to try to get her wins. If she can't get early finishes with her physicality and the weight cut starts to impact her, you could see her start to slow down and really not be the form that she had when she was finishing women left and right as she made her way to the UFC. Now, she's going up against Luana Carolina, who has her own weight issues to worry about, but more so the other side of things. She used to be a UFC flyweight, but a few weight misses, but not to mention pulling out of a matchup on a weigh-in day due to complications due to a weight cut back in March, has now forced Carolina up to the bantamweight division, and I'm sure she's going to have to prove herself there a few fights before she can convince the UFC to go back down to 125 pounds. But she's riding a 3-fight winning streak, one of those wins coming by knockout over Yulia Stoliarenko, and then last time around she won a decision against Lucia Pudilova. That night, she utilized good takedown defense and really utilized her Muay Thai approach to pick apart Pudilova and run away with that fight on the scorecards. Now, Carolina is a fighter that I've been very low on throughout her career, but there are times where she just continuously comes back and proves me wrong and goes out there and pulls off upsets. It's usually her volume striking approach with her Muay Thai. She stays very active in terms of throwing combinations and throwing kicks. And then it's also been her improvements in her takedown defense and get-ups that has kept opponents away from having success against her on the mat. Namely, Yulia Stoliarenko, even Lucy Pudilova, who was formerly a striker, had really started to work on her takedown game, but she was unable and unsuccessful in terms of doing anything against Carolina in that realm. Now here, clear grappler versus striker matchup, right? I think Montague needs to get this fight to the ground to have ultimate success here against Carolina because, like I said, Montague is very robotic in the striking realm, and that's where I believe Carolina could have an advantage over her. But I have some qualms in terms of betting Montague at minus 210, given her weight cut, first time ever coming down to 135 pounds. If she can't get Carolina to the ground and Carolina's improved takedown defense and defensive grappling holds up, then Montague is forced to strike with Carolina. And in my opinion, Carolina is the better striker. So, it's so hard for me to say this, as a big Montague fan and a big Luana Carolina hater, Carolina can make this fight a lot more competitive than the odds indicate. But I'm still going to leave Montague. I think there is a lot to read into with her being a close training partner of Kayla Harrison. We've obviously seen it in action as well with her 6-0 record thus far. I just want to see what she looks like on the scales. I just want to see what she looks like, going up against somebody like Carolina who might actually be able to provide some resistance, and if she can actually battle through that, I'm going to go Montague by submission. But if this line widens some more, Carolina as a money line spot may not be a bad spot considering her experience advantage, her improved grappling defense, as well as her striking advantage in this matchup. So I'll keep my eye on this line as fight week rolls on. But in terms of an official prediction, I'm going to go Michelle Montague and Montague by submission. All right, moving over to the men's bantamweight division now. We got Colby Thicknesse coming in at plus 130 going up against Josias Musasa, who comes in at minus 150. Now, Thicknesse actually went up against Elliott Toporia's brother, Alexandre Topuria. I was about to say Pantoja. Alexandre Topuria. Both fighters making their debut that night, but Thicknesse had no answer for anything Topuria was throwing at him. Whether it was the power striking approach where he hurt Thicknesse in the first round, or the grappling, which Thicknesse actually initiated in the third round and quickly got reversed and just fought off Topuria for the rest of that round. There's no success that Thicknesse really had in that fight. When he can start flowing at distance, he has some decent striking. He has an aggressive guard against guys that don't really know what they're doing from that top position, but he's a guy that doesn't really strike me as somebody that's going to hold on to their UFC roster spot for too long. He's a training partner of Alexander Volkanovski, and I think that there was a little bit of a baked-in storyline going into his UFC debut, but now that he has to kind of prove himself and show that he deserves to be on the roster, I think he's going to struggle to do so. And he has a tough fighter to try to prove it against here in Josias Musasa, who suffered his first pro defeat last time around. I believe that was back in March, where he did a decent job initially of stuffing the takedowns and unorthodox rolls that Carlos Vera likes to bring to the table. But Vera did a great job in terms of hiding a nasty head kick behind some of his offense that dropped Musasa, and then Vera got to his BJJ that way, quickly taking the back of Musasa and submitting him that night. And Musasa ultimately fumbling the bag as a minus 600 favorite that night. Now, I knew Musasa, was tough to trust in that spot, especially going up against somebody as good as Vera in the ground game. Musasa is still very green in his professional MMA career, right? 8-1, 26 years old, mainly relying on his athleticism, power, and speed to knock his opponents out quickly. Even on the Contender series, he won by split decision, but that was a very close fight that could have gone either way. But he's a guy that still this early in his career is going to continue to rely on the physical attributes that he brings to the table. And there will be a certain sector of guys that he can beat on this UFC roster with those tools alone. But as he starts getting it deeper into his UFC career, he's going to have to round out the technical aspects of his game. He's going to have to improve his BJJ defense. He's going to have to be a little bit more technical with his striking. But if the UFC gives him some decent opponents, stylistically speaking, for his next couple of fights, he can start to transform into a better version of himself. Now, here against Thicknesse, this is a winnable fight for Musasa. I don't think Thicknesse will be able to pull off something what Vera did. He might, but I don't think it's going to come to fruition. I think it'll be Musasa controlling this fight on the feet. I think he ends up landing big shots on Thicknesse to eventually put him down. I think Musasa wins by knockout. On the flip side, I think if Thicknesse wins, he probably wins by submission. So what I actually like is the plus money under 2.5. I'm expecting some violence from both guys here, but I think it's Musasa who's ultimately going to be the difference maker with the power that he brings. His speed and power is going to be too much for Thicknesse, and that will allow him to find that knockout. But rather than taking minus 150, I would rather take his knockout prop or the under 2.5 to potentially cover a Thicknesse submission should that come to fruition. So I'm going to go Musasa and Musasa by knockout, but the under 2.5 would be the better way to go about it. Next up in the lightweight division, we got Jamie Mullarkey going up against Rolando Bedoya in a fight where both guys come in at a pick'em, at least on Monday of fight week. Now, I'll start off on the Mullarkey side of things, who's coming off back-to-back knockout losses to Nasrat Haqparast and Maurizio Huffy. Now, Hoofy, I should say. Now, it's been almost a year and a half since we've seen Mullarkey in action, and I think it was good for him to take some time away. Now, it's not like he's just been sitting on his ass this entire time, but he has been taking up some grappling competitions, some grappling matches. He even just recently earned his BJJ brown belt, so he's definitely trying to flaunt that a little bit. But that just goes to show the well-roundedness in Mullarkey's game. This is a guy who, in my opinion, has been quite underrated throughout his MMA career, and he has pulled off some upsets in certain fights that not a lot of people were believing him to be able to. In his fight against Francisco Prado, that was a great opportunity to showcase that you can bank on the minute winner at a decent enough line and hope that he avoids getting knocked out, and it might cash out for you. But then there's other fights where he's winning 99% of the fight, like he did against Mohamed Naimov, and then he gets clipped in the second round and put away there. So there is a fine line you have to walk with Mullarkey, but he is a guy that mixes the martial arts very well and utilizes good pressure. He has good strikes, good takedown entries, good control from that top position, and he has great cardio to do it for 15 minutes if he needs to. Now, he's only 31 years old, so I still believe he has a lot to offer at the UFC level. It's just hoping that his durability can hold up long enough for him to go out there and still capture a couple victories. Now, he's going up against Rolando Bedoya, who is now 0-3 in his UFC career after making a short notice UFC debut against Chaos Williams back in May of 2023. He took his first two fights in the UFC up at welterweight, but then decided to drop down to lightweight against Jai Herbert, and unfortunately came up on the losing end that night, as well as he couldn't deal with the speed and distance striking approach from Herbert. Bedoya is a guy that won a lot of fans in that Chaos Williams fight because of his ability to take damage, move forward, and still engage with wars against his opponents, but it's just not really translating to the UFC level. He's a fighter that trains out of the same camp as Charles do Bronx Oliveira, and he brings that same bit of violence to his fights where he loves to engage in the pocket and throw his Muay Thai combinations. He doesn't have a whole lot of knockout power, at least that I've been able to notice in recent fights. And that might hurt him here against Mullarkey because he's going to need to rely on that power to really thwart the overall mixed martial arts approach that Mullarkey is going to be throwing at him. In terms of grappling, we don't often see Bedoya look to utilize it offensively. He's often having to showcase his defenses so that he can keep fights in the striking realm where he often feels most comfortable. His durability is high level, which is obviously something that will help him in a lot of his fights. But I still feel like this is a spot that Mullarkey can put together a better body of work from a mixed martial arts perspective, from landing his output to mixing in takedowns to keeping Bedoya on his tippy toes in terms of just not knowing what the hell is going to be coming back his way. It's just hoping that Mullarkey can eat Bedoya's best shots. I'm going to lean that he can. But I'm going to wait for fight week to play it out a little bit more because I can definitely see some people looking to fade Mullarkey and roll in on Bedoya, which should give us a better line on Mullarkey later on in fight week. So in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go Mullarkey and Mullarkey by decision, but it's going to be one that I'll probably have to sweat out. But I think he is the better overall mixed martial artist, and he should be able to get the decision victory here. All right, next up in the welterweight division, we got Jonathan Micallef coming in at plus 100 going up against Elliott, who comes in at minus 120. Now, starting off on the Micallef side, he started his UFC career on the right foot, although it was with a very boring performance against Kevin Jousset. Going into that fight, Micallef was mainly known for his strong grappling approach where he's often able to muzzle opponents on the mat and then work to finishing positions just like he did in his contract-winning performance against Mohamed Ado. But against Kevin Jousset, we saw him utilize a mobile kicking game where he just threw kick after kick after kick, and Jousset had no answer in terms of trying to track him down or cut off the cage to get off on his own offense. That was until he was finally able to do so in the third round, but by then it was too little too late as Micallef had done enough work through the first 10 minutes to earn that decision victory. He's physical, he's strong, has some decent power, but not so much to the point that I think it's going to be all that threatening at the UFC level. I think if Micallef wants to get to the next level, he needs to get back to his grappling, as that's where he's been most effective throughout his career. Now he's going up against Elliott, who fumbled the bag as a minus 500 favorite last time around against Seok-Hyun Ko. You could tell from jump once that fight started that Elliott was going to struggle with the forward movement and power threat that Ko brought to the table. Elliott was trying to throw his offense, trying to stick and move as best as he could, and then he even tried to sprinkle in his regular takedown approach, but he couldn't get anything off on Ko. That's when Ko really started to take over, started marching Elliott down and muzzled him by throwing big shots, but also getting his own grappling game going. And that's where we saw Elliott really start to break around that second round, and that's where he really couldn't get any momentum back in his favor. Crazy that he was a minus 500 favorite that night, as a lot of people believed that his pace, pressure, and wrestling would have been too much for the Korean fighter. That ended up not being the case. But I think we'll see Elliott go back to the drawing board here and come back with that style that we know he is very successful with. Putting good volume on his opponent, sticking and moving, utilizing good cardio, and then obviously mixing in the takedowns and scrambling to really wear down his opponents. Now, Micallef will probably go takedown for takedown here against Elliott, but I think it's going to be the striking advantage of Elliott that will ultimately be the difference maker. I don't think there's too much power for Elliott to worry about from the Micallef side of things, so I think that we'll see him get to his activity and not be too gun-shy in terms of what's coming back his way. Hopefully, he doesn't get stuck at distance the way that Jousset did, and this will allow Elliott to dictate the pace, mix in his takedowns, keep Micallef as the one that's on his back foot and be in the driver's seat for the majority of this fight. And I think that will allow Elliott to win this fight on the scorecards. Getting him at minus 120 after he was minus 500 last time around, I think is a bit of a steal. And I think there's just too big of a line correction here on the Elliott side of things that we have to take advantage of it. So I'm going to go Elliott and Elliott by decision. All right. Next up in the middleweight division, we got Cam Rowston coming in at plus 130, going up against Andre Petroski, who comes in at minus 150. Now, Rowston makes his UFC debut after earning his contract on the Contender Series just last month, where he pulled off a nasty knockout victory over Brandon Holmes, putting together a barrage of shots to put Holmes away. Now, Rowston tried getting to his grappling, which is what he's been using in recent fights, showing off that BJJ brown belt, I believe it is, but he couldn't get Holmes down and really settle it or establish a top position. But that's when Rowston really started to put on his foot on the gas with his striking. He saw that his range advantage allowed him to really crash the pocket with big power, and Holmes wasn't really moving his head, which allowed Rowston to really just let go with big shots and hurt Holmes repeatedly until the referee was forced to step in. Now, Rowston is a fighter that has a long range, like I said, 6'3", 75-inch reach, likes to rely on the grappling when he can, but as we saw in his Torres Finney fight, this is a guy that can be grounded out by better grapplers and better jiu-jitsu specialists, but also a guy that can be hit. Even though he's tall and lanky, he is a very hittable fighter with his chin up in the air and not the greatest striking defense. Now he's going up against UFC veteran Andre Petroski, who's coming off of a decision loss to Edmund Shabazian last time around. And I have to credit Shabazian. That was a fight that I expected if it reached the second round that Petroski was going to start to take over, as Shabazian normally starts to fall off with his effectiveness, especially with his poor gas tank. But he allowed the threat of his power to muzzle Petroski, and that allowed Shabazian to dictate the pace of that fight and fight on his terms, which means that he did not gas out. He didn't have to go out of his comfort zone, and he was able to pick apart Petroski from distance and win that fight on the scorecards. That ultimately snapped a 3-fight winning streak for Petroski, who I've also hammered in the past for having a cardio issue, but this is a guy that has gone to a decision in 6 of his last 8 fights and won 5 of those decisions, showing that he can go the distance if he needs to and still be effective. We saw him go out there and outstrike Rodolfo Vieira by nullifying all the takedowns from the BJJ wizard and touching him up on the feet. But at his best, I really think the BJJ black belt here in Petroski is used best when he gets his opponents to the ground and smothers them from that top position. I think he's learned from his mistakes earlier on in his career, where he goes a little bit too hard for the finish and then ends up gassing himself out and getting finished. So now he's looking to just control opponents more, not really look for a finish as much, but really control these positions, get off on some big shots so he doesn't get forced to stand back up. But it's really his wrestling that has helped him get him a lot of his victories recently. Now here against Rowston, he's going to have to lean on that again. I'd be surprised if Rowston is the one that ends up looking for takedowns, because I don't think they all work out very well here against Petroski. I think we'll see Rowston actually try to do what he did against Holmes by picking him apart on the feet and trying to get that knockout. But I think Petroski will be able to muzzle most of that with a lot of his big power shots and eventually changing levels, getting this fight to the ground, and then grinding Rowston out from that top position. I think Petroski deserves to be the favorite. I think he wins this fight. I think he grinds it out. But there will be some sticky moments when this fight is in the striking realm where Rowston might turn up the volume a little bit, put Petroski in some uncomfortable spots. But I think we'll see Petroski eventually change levels, get those takedowns, utilize his strength advantage, and really muzzle Rowston on the mat. So I'm going to go Petroski here and Petroski by decision. Next up in the light heavyweight division, we got City Kickboxing Zone, Navajo Sterling coming in at -240, going up against Rodolfo Bellato, who comes in at +205. Now, starting off on the Sterling side of things, he has a 7-0 undefeated record and picked up that 7th victory back in May, where he was able to outwork and go to a decision against Ivan Erslan. That night, we saw him utilize his striking advantage early, then really start to lean into his grappling in the second and third rounds, showcasing that he has transformed himself into a complete mixed martial artist. Now, he comes from a kickboxing background, and that's obviously what got him started in mixed martial arts. And that's obviously the strongest part of his game, coming from that City Kickboxing crew. But as he gets further into his career, he is showcasing that he can be a complete mixed martial artist with his ability to change levels behind his combinations and really wear his opponents down, and showcasing the ability to go 15 minutes if he can't get that early finish against his opponents. At 27 years old, he is really coming into his own and really becoming this guy that a lot of people expected him to be after being such a heavy favorite on the Contender Series a couple years ago. He's a very strong fighter, nasty power as well, but I love to see him just mix in those takedowns to really keep his opponents guessing. Now, he's going up against Adolfo Bellato, who's coming off of a very, very weird circumstance. I believe that fight took place back in June, where he went up against Paul Craig, was controlling most of that fight. Craig eventually pulled him into his guard near the ending of that first round. Bellato managed to get out, but then saw there was only a couple of seconds left on the clock, so he started to go off with some ground and pound. But in doing so, he actually ended up getting up kicked by Paul Craig while he was down, and that's where we got the theatrics, right? Right after he got hit, you see Bellato look over to the referee, kind of complain, and then go out and fall to his back. And then when he finally regained consciousness, he thought he was still in the fight and started to pull guard against the referee. Very weird circumstance to see him go from complaining to out to fighting the referee. Very, very weird. But what's even more weird is if that was true and he wasn't faking it, why is he coming back only 3 months after having being separated from his consciousness that badly? With that said, I don't believe he was out that badly. I think there was a little bit of an acting job there. Why he did it, I don't know. That was a fight that he was winning, that he probably would have continued to win as that fight started to go into deeper water. It is what it is. The fight prior to that, he got nearly finished on numerous occasions in that first round against Jimmy Crute, but managed to battle back in the second and third rounds and go to a draw. So it's been almost 3 fights now he hasn't gotten his hand raised, and he nearly got finished in that first UFC fight as well against Ihor Potieria. If you remember, he was on death's door throughout that first round, but managed to come back in the second round and get a finish of his own. He has very strong striking, good distance management, and improving ground game as well, which has obviously helped him, keep fights in the stand-up realm, especially on the Contender series when he finished Murtaza Talha to earn his contract. But it's really about the striking for Bellato. But he has been hurt. He's very hittable, and he can be put away by guys that know how to close the show. And unfortunately for Bellato, he's facing exactly that here against Navajo Sterling. I think Sterling is the far superior striker. I think his grappling is up to snuff in case Bellato wants to take that approach. I think Sterling will nullify that. And I think Sterling will be in the driver's seat for most of this matchup, and I think he eventually produces a knockout. I know he's gone to back-to-back decisions over Tuko Tokos and Ivan Erslan, but this is a very winnable fight for him, especially with how hittable Bellato is, and mix in a little bit of the size advantage that Sterling has, but the raw striking advantage that Sterling holds in this matchup. I think it's going to be too much for Bellato to deal with, and I think we'll see Sterling end up finding that knockout probably within a round and a half. All right. That brings us to a lightweight fixture now between Tom Nolan, who comes in at -150, and Charlie Campbell, who comes in at +130. I'll start off on the Nolan side of things, who's riding a 3-fight winning streak, and most recently coming off of a decision victory over Vyacheslav Borshev. Now, going into his UFC debut, he had mainly gone out there and finished the majority of his opponents early on. And that usually comes to show because he is 6'3" with a 73-inch reach in the lightweight division. Often the bigger and more powerful opponent in his fights, he's often able to go out there and finish these guys pretty quickly with a lot of knees and elbows and straight shots down the pipe. But as you saw in the Alex Reyes fight and then even Vyacheslav Borshev fight, he has to dig deeper into his bag of tricks if he hopes to be successful as he works up the lightweight rankings. That's why we've seen him start to lean into some grappling, threaten with some submissions, but really try to put together a complete game so his opponents don't really know what to expect when he starts throwing down with them. But one thing is for sure, you have to respect the power that he brings early on with his Muay Thai, because he is capable of putting anybody's lights out. And the same can be said against him, right? Nicholas Mota was able to hand him his first professional loss by knocking him out because we saw some holes in Tom Nolan's striking defense that time, which I think that he's been able to really reel in. He's really been able to get the better of his striking defense now and become a little bit more responsible of a striker, and hoping that he doesn't end up getting put out like he did against Nicholas Mota. Now he's going up against Charlie Campbell, who also finds himself on a 3-fight winning streak. 2 of those coming in the UFC, the first of which was a short notice UFC debut against Alex Reyes, where he won by knockout, and then last time around where he went to a decision against Trevor Peek in a fight where he did a great job in terms of dictating the pace, managing the range, and staying away from pocket exchanges where Peek is often at his best. We even saw Campbell get some grappling going, getting the back of Peek at times and getting some control time, all to mainly muzzle Peek, who is just a rabid dog when he steps inside the cage. Campbell is an educated striker with good distance management, good combinations, some stinking power, but I have some question marks about his hitability or the fact that he is hittable just as top Nolan is. So I expect this fight to play out somewhat close. Both these guys, good strikers. Obviously, Nolan's going to have a 3-inch height advantage, although he'll only have a 1-inch reach advantage. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Nolan try to mix this up and get this into the grappling realm, where we'll often see him threatening with that front choke. Now, he's never won by submission in his 9 pro wins, but I think that win is just around the corner, and this is a fight that he could potentially do it against Charlie Campbell. We know he doesn't really look to hold opponents down when he gets to his grappling, but he really likes to threaten with that choke as his opponents try to build their base to try to work back to their feet. And this is a fighter in Campbell that I think Nolan could actually be successful in doing that against. We also have to take into consideration that Campbell has taken this fight on short notice, albeit I believe he's had about 2 to 3 weeks to prepare for this matchup. But I think it's still a difficult fight for him to overcome. I think Nolan will be able to clip him, either club and sub him or just straight up knock him out. But you have to respect the power coming back his way from Campbell. This is closer to a bit of a toss-up that minus 150 on Nolan indicates, so I wouldn't mind anybody taking a shot on Campbell, but I ultimately think it's going to be Nolan who ends up getting his hand raised and getting it done inside the distance. Next up in the heavyweight division, we got Justin Tafa coming in at minus 115, going up against Louis Sutherland, who comes in at minus 105. Now, Tafa is on a 2-fight losing streak, most recently being knocked out by Ellison Teixeira in about 35 seconds. That was a fight where we knew that there was a ton of volatility given the knockout power of both guys, but also the crazy size advantage that Teixeira had coming into that fight. Prior to that, Tafa had been taken down 7 times by Carl Williams and lost that fight on the scorecards. He had a 100% takedown defense rate going into that fight, but it was clear that he had not fought anybody who was as dead set as Carl Williams was in terms of trying to take Tafa to the ground. We know what Tafa brings to the table. He's one-dimensional, slow, plodding heavyweight with nasty leg kicks, but also big power in his hands, which he's been able to turn out the lights of all 4 of his UFC wins thus far. He's never won a UFC fight that's gone past the 2-minute mark. Now, his win, I believe, against Juan Adams was at 1 minute 59 seconds, but still proves my point that any fight that's gone past 2 minutes inside the UFC for Justin Tafa has really not gone his way. He's very front-loaded with a lot of success that he brings to the table, and a lot of that has to do with the knockout power that he brings. Now he's going up against UFC debutant Louis Sutherland, who comes in as the current, or I guess most recent, LFL heavyweight champion. That's Levels Fight League, which is kind of the B to / C tier European MMA promotion. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. The last loss that he suffered came against Slim Trabelsi under the Bellator banner. And, I originally came across him 3 years ago when he took on Abraham Babley on the undercard of a PFL card. He eventually, like I said, got away from the PFL tour banner, got over to the LFL, faced some very mediocre competition. He seems a bit out of shape, but he is still somewhat athletic. He has some decent power, looks to mix up the game decent enough, but not the greatest takedowns, not the greatest control. Cardio is a little bit suspect as well. When he can uncork a big shot and he lands on the button, he definitely has the chances to put most of his opponents out. I'm not a big Justin Tafa guy. I don't like to bet on him all that often. Normally, I look to go out there and fade him because of the one-dimensional style that he brings to the game, and also his reliance on that early knockout to get his wins. But here against Louis Sutherland, this feels like a spot where he can shut down the takedowns of Sutherland, or at least quickly work back to his feet, as Sutherland does not have all that good of control. And then from there, I think he can really pick apart Sutherland and eventually find that knockout. So to get near pick'ems here on Tafa in a fight where he should find that big shot here against Sutherland, I have to take a shot. Again, Sutherland might be able to mix the martial arts better, but I think he's going to struggle to stay away from the big power of Tafa while trying to get off on his own offense as well. So I'm going to go Tafa here and Tafa by knockout. But again, the odds play a big part in this, and I feel like Tafa should be the slight favorite. So to get him near pick'ems, I think is worth a shot. All right, moving over to the welterweight division now, we got Jake Matthews coming in at minus 405, going up against Neil Magny, who comes in at plus 335. Now, this is the first, or at least third opportunity, I believe, that Jake Matthews is going to get at going on a 4-fight winning streak. Like I said, he's had 2 other opportunities in the UFC to get a 4-fight winning streak, but he's come up short in both of those spots. Now he seems like he has his confidence at an all-time high. He's mixing up the martial arts very well. He's showcasing a ever-improved striking game, even going there and outstriking a power puncher like Francisco Prado, and then even going out there and showcasing that he knew that he needed to get the fight into the grappling realm against Chidi and Njokuani, and then quickly found a rear naked choke after that. He's a very strong fighter, well-rounded fighter, and being in the UFC for as long as he has, 31 years old, 22 fights of UFC experience, he's really coming into his own. I mean, he might be at his peak, but he's going to go up against a very tough and veteran savvy Neil Magny, who was able to really pull out those veteran skills against Elizio Zaleski last time around, as he survived the early grappling threats from Zaleski, eventually changed positions in the second round and really put his foot on the gas and got Zaleski out of there near the ending of the second round. Magny is a guy that weaponizes his cardio very well, forward movement, a ton of offense, loves to mix it up in the clinch and really wear opponents down there. But he's come up short against guys that have strong enough wrestling games and good BJJ to put him in bad spots, or guys that are very skilled strikers that can pick him apart and knock him out, just like as we saw Michael Morales and Carlos Praches do in recent fights. This is a tough one to call, but one that I surely will not get on the heavy chalk on Jake Matthews. I think Matthews can out-wrestle Magny. I think he can outstrike him, but if he chooses to wrestle and he can't put Magny away, we have seen Matthews slow down in the past when he utilizes grapple-heavy approaches and is unsuccessful in terms of putting his opponents away. If Magny can continue to showcase the resistance we've been seeing from him recently against grapplers and constantly forcing them to work, disrupting their top position, and then really putting his foot on the gas when he gets back to his feet, he could definitely have some success here against Matthews in deep water. I think this could be a fight where it looks like Matthews early and then Magny late. So that's what's keeping me off that Matthews minus 405 line. But stylistically speaking, I think this is a very winnable fight for the Aussie. So I'm going to go Matthews, and Matthews by decision, but I'd be very wary in terms of taking that heavy a chalk because I think Neil Magny has more than a 20% chance of winning this fight. All right, moving over to the featherweight division now. We got Jack Jenkins coming in at minus 280, going up against Ramon Taveras, who comes in at plus 240. Now, starting off on the Jenkins side of things, he was completely outmatched in his last matchup against Gabriel Santos, who did a great job in terms of just putting the aggression on Jenkins and eventually getting Jenkins out of there in that second round. Prior to that, Jenkins had beat and really pulverized Herbert Burns en route to a third round stoppage. But I still think Jenkins is one of the better prospects to come out of the Oceanic region. He has a great calf kick, which he stays very busy with. He wasn't able to really do it against Santos, as Santos was fighting from a southpaw position. And anytime Jenkins tried to switch stances, Santos made him pay for it immediately. And then Jenkins also has a reliable grappling game as long as he has enough of an edge against his opponents there. He also has great cardio to go 15 minutes, showcasing an overall MMA style, just as he showed when he beat Jamal Emmers, Don Shainis. Again, he's a very solid all-around fighter. It just depends on the level of competition he's going up against to determine if he'll be able to get his hand raised or not. And I think he's going into a matchup here that's very winnable for him against a boxer from Jacksonville, Ramon Taveras. Now, Taveras last time around got doubled up on strikes against veteran Davey Grant, who was able to beat him to the punch and land way more volume as Taveras was struggling to get a beat on what Grant was throwing at him. Grant was also throwing a lot of kicks, which seemed to disrupt Taveras' flow and really cause him to struggle to get into his combination striking flow, which has made him successful in fights like he had against Cartavius Romeus or even the Surrey City fight, which I think there is some controversy there in terms of whether he deserved to win that fight or not. When he's on, Taveras is very fast twitch with his strikes, has some big sting on his shots as well, which can really put opponents his way if he lands cleanly enough. And he has a good enough takedown defense game that he's been forcing opponents to strike with him more often than not. Now here, Taveras, another southpaw for Jack Jenkins, but one that I think Jenkins can maneuver around a little bit better than he did against Gabriel Santos. I think we'll see Jenkins batter that lead calf of Taveras. I think we'll see him land some takedowns, and I think we'll see Jenkins really control the majority of this fight and really have not have too much trouble in terms of implementing his style. Something else to keep an eye on here for Taveras. He often struggled to make weight at 135 pounds, even on the regional scene. But now it seems like he's moving up to 145 pounds, which is probably better for his career, but may not work out for him all that well, fighting these bigger fighters who might be able to take some of his best shots and then also utilize a grapple-heavy approach against him more successfully. So I'm going to go Jenkins here. I'm a little bit questionable of that minus 280. If it turns out to be a complete striking battle, Taveras will be more live than a plus 240 underdog indicates. But I think Jenkins will be able to implement his calf kick. I think he'll be able to get to his takedowns and his control. And I think he grinds this fight out. But I'm going to keep an eye on this line. If it starts to get shorter and we see Jenkins, come in around that minus 230 line, maybe I'd be willing to take the shot there. But with him getting closer to a 3-1 line, I think Taveras will be more live than that indicates. So I'll still go Jenkins and Jenkins by decision. All right, co-main event time now, where we got a light heavyweight scrap between Jimmy the Brute Crute, who comes in at minus 175, going up against Ivan Erslan, who comes in at plus 150. Now, Crute is coming off his first victory in 5 years. That was his, in as many fights, he went 0-3-2 over his previous 5 fights. Hadn't scored a victory since 2020, but managed to pull off an arm-to-arm victory over Marcin Prachnio earlier this year to finally get his confidence back. Now, this is a guy that was dealing with a lot of mental issues. He had even retired for a couple years, was really down on himself in a couple of those fights. There was one fight where he retired right after the decision had been read or after he had gotten finished. So very unfortunate for Crute, but he stuck with it. He eventually got back into the cage, got that victory over Prachnio, and showcased that he still has a lot to give. He's only 29 years old, and he's a very dangerous submission specialist, which is often how he ends up getting his hand raised. He's very reckless in the striking realm, the way that he applies his pressure and aggression, but it's all about eventually getting fights to the ground, whether it's with a knockdown or a takedown, and then from there he's very good in terms of getting to finishing positions, which is how he's finished the majority of his opponents. His durability is a bit of a question mark at times. Also his cardio, but it really depends on the guy he's going up against and if they can exploit those flaws in his game. Now he's going up against Ivan Erslan, who is now 0-2 in the UFC, most recently coming up short by decision against Navajo Sterling. Erslan is a guy who had won his previous 8 victories by first round knockout, although he's had some losses sprinkled throughout that run. Kind of goes to show what kind of fighter he is. If he can't get that early finish, he usually struggles later on in matchups. He is a guy that can be taken down. He is a guy that can be controlled. He's a guy that can be countered off of his big power punches. He used to originally train out of the ATT Zagreb branch over there in Croatia. When he got signed to the UFC, he moved over to Florida to train at the headquarters of American Top Team. But it seems like he spent the majority of his training camp this time around over there in Zagreb, even training alongside former UFC fighter Darko Stosic. Big power puncher. Obviously, he's live to catch Crute here, but I think Crute will eventually be able to get this fight to the ground, and I think he'll be able to get a submission. I think his aggression will help him mask a level change and a takedown, and then from there, we've seen Erslan give up his back plenty of times, and I think that's a no-no against a guy like Crute, and I think once Crute gets that back position, it's just a matter of time before he works to a finishing spot, whether it's by ground and pound or by sinking in that rear naked choke. But again, Crute, very flaky fighter to trust. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Erslan is able to pick up his first UFC win by landing a big shot on Crute early here. So, closer to a coin flip fight, if I'm being honest, rather than this minus 175 line on Crute. I'm still going to pick him to win. I think he wins by submission, but I'd think twice in terms of laying that chalk on Jimmy the Brute Crute. All right. That brings us to our main event now, which also goes down in the light heavyweight division as we have streaking Carlos Ulberg looking to notch his 9th straight victory, coming in at minus 260, going up against Dominic Reyes, who is looking for his 4th straight victory, coming in as a plus 220 underdog. Now, we'll start off on the Ulberg side of things, who picked up the biggest win of his career in a tepid pace striking approach against Jan Blachowicz last time around. But it was good to see Ulberg shuck off the takedowns, shuck off the control time, and really outdamage Blachowicz on the feet. Although it wasn't by a large margin, it was still enough for him to convincingly win that fight on the scorecards. Prior to that, he had chucked off the 2 takedown attempts from Volkan Oezdemir and outstruck him on the feet. And a guy, that's really done a good job in terms of implementing his kickboxing advantage, which he often holds in a lot of his fights. He's only lost his first UFC fight. Outside of that, he's won 8 straight victories and really showcased that he deserves to be amongst the best in this light heavyweight division. He puts together combinations very well, has some good stinging power, but has also been able to show that he can go 15 minutes if that's what's required of him. And he's also showcased that he can land some takedowns if he needs to. But it's really about that striking and disciplined approach for him to often get his victories. Now he's going up against Dominic Reyes, who has turned a 4-fight losing streak, the last 3 of those all being very bad knockout losses, has now brought that into a 3-fight winning streak where he's knocked out all 3 of his opponents. The last of which was against Nikita Krylov from earlier this year, where we saw Reyes stay in perpetual motion, not allowing Krylov to get in on an easy takedown attempt, and that's how he was able to counter that forward aggression of Krylov with counter shots, straight shots down the pipe, and eventually that kill shot that put Krylov away. Reyes is capable of turning anybody's lights out, so to see him as a plus 220 underdog here against Ulberg is a little bit surprising. I do think Ulberg is the better technical striker here, but Reyes showcases that he has power that still needs to be respected at this level. Ultimately, I think that Reyes is going to struggle to get to his game, and I think Ulberg will be able to hit him more often than not, and I think that will eventually lead to an Ulberg knockout. I think he's the superior striker. I think if Reyes wants to try to take this fight to the ground and try to impose his will that way, I think he'll be unsuccessful in doing so. And I think he might overextend himself trying to get those spots, and that will lead to Ulberg countering him and eventually putting him away too. But even if Reyes doesn't take that approach and he looks to strike with Ulberg, he might be able to pull something off here. It's possible. We can't count it out in the light heavyweight division, especially with how Reyes has been looking as of late. So if this line continues to climb and we see Ulberg become a bigger favorite, a small shot on Reyes is not out of the realm of possibility. Again, this comes down to odds. Reyes is a great striker. Reyes has big knockout power, and we've seen Ulberg be hurt in the past. But I really think Ulberg is at an all-time high in terms of confidence. Technically speaking, I think he's the superior striker, and I think that will be enough for him to eventually find that big shot to put Reyes away. So give me Ulberg and Ulberg by knockout. There you guys go. This one was tough to get through. I'm sure you guys still hear it in my voice that my nose is fucking me up. It has taken me an hour and 20 minutes to record this. I'm sure obviously the podcast is going to be, maybe 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes shorter than an hour and 20 that it took me to record this, because there was a lot of cuts in between, a lot of me blowing my nose, a lot of me just trying to get through this damn thing, all for you guys. So I appreciate the love and support as always. The least you guys can do is hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates and the Chalk or Not segment. Also, we got Contender Series going down. I've already dropped my final plays for that card on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. So make sure you guys check that out if you want some action on that. Otherwise, like I said, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.